Hello, everyone. I'm here with Dr. Hadley Wood, who is a professor at Point Loma Nazarene University. I've known her for the past 4 years of my life, and she's been a real amazing mentor to me and a huge inspiration to my life. And I'm gonna interview her, and we're gonna talk a little bit about what it takes to have a successful marriage and to really thrive in it.
And was married for 18 very happy years, and am now working through the loss of my husband who died 9 months ago.
Yeah. And how's that grieving process been for you?
It's been hard, way harder than I imagined it would be. I mean, because it's not just that I'm grieving the loss of him. I feel like I've lost me. There was a lot of me that sort of blossomed in that relationship, and I'm having trouble locating that me. And plus, who am I without this sort of other person that was so much a part of my own identity? So, yeah, it's been tough. It's been much more challenging, probably the most challenging thing I've ever done.
It sounds like you have a very, very deep love for your husband.
Oh, yeah.
Could you share with us a little bit about what your relationship was like throughout the 18 years of your marriage?
Well, yeah, it was great. It was great because, to begin with, we both wanted to be in the same marriage. That was one thing that made it good, because sometimes one person's going to want this, like, super passionate, passionately angry, passionately loving, and somebody else wants to, be married to, in a relationship that feels like a comfortable armchair. You can just kind of take it for granted. It's there when you want it, but otherwise you go about your business. Those two people would not make a very happy couple because they have very different ideas of what a relationship should look like. My husband and I, we had very similar ideas. Not identical. There were still things you have to negotiate, but very similar. Second thing that made it really successful is everybody has a very specific, equation. Love equals this. I feel loved when somebody does this. So, for my husband, he felt loved if somebody built him a nest, cooked him a meal, decorated the house, reached over in the restaurant to just take his hand, you belong with me, rubbed his shoulder, gave him a foot rub, any just sort of little thing that just sort of fluffed his pillow emotionally, so to speak, listened to him. And he loved to talk. And I'm really not the talker. And so that was a great fit, too. And for me, I feel loved if somebody sees me, because my narcissistic mother was unable to see me. And having spent a childhood as Canada, what they say about the U.S. and Canada, Canada looks over the border and sees the U.S. U.S. looks over the border and sees the U.S. Well, I was Canada and my mother was the U.S. and she had trouble seeing me. But my husband saw me entirely. And, so that also made it very successful. And we loved to play. We liked a lot of physical affection. We both had a extremely high appetite for life and new things and new experiences, and loved being together. I mean, we just had a fabulous time together.
That sounds like an amazing, beautiful marriage.
It was wonderful. It was a good enough marriage that there were times, and it happened more than once, where we'd be out together at a restaurant and some stranger would come up to us and say, are you married? And we'd say, yeah. How long? And we'd say 12, 14, 15, whatever it was. And they would say, I hope I have a marriage like this one day. It is so obvious how much you love each other. I'm inspired. So that was kind of cool.
Yeah, that's always great to hear from a stranger.
Yeah.
Of course. Now, as in every marriage, I'm assuming that you had your ups and downs as well.
Oh, yeah.
Could you describe to us some of the struggles that you faced in your 18 years in your marriage?
Well, I'll talk about 3 of them. We got married when my daughter was almost 16. And within a year, she hit enough of adolescence that they finally diagnosed, yes, this was bipolar disorder. And she was pretty highly reactive and difficult. And my husband had grown up with an unmedicated paranoid schizophrenic. And my daughter's emotional frenzy triggered really post-traumatic stress for my husband. And so in the middle of the worst of her acting out, he just, and we'd been married, a year and a half maybe, and he said, I'm moving out. I found an apartment. I've made a commitment. I'll be paying half the mortgage, but I'm moving out. And this was a choice moment for me. I could have taken the easy road, and the easy road would have been to feel abandoned and offended. But I thought about it and thought, okay, what if I'd married him and we'd moved into his home? And he had a teenage boy who did all the things that my brother did that traumatized me. And I thought, oh yeah, there's no way I could stay in that home. And I knew my husband was freshly retired, and I knew that he tended to have a lot of anxiety about money. And so I went to him and I said, I'll be paying half your rent. And he said, you don't have to do that. I said, oh, on the contrary, I do. Because it needs to be clear to both you and me, you are not running away from the marriage or from me. You and I together are making a decision to put you somewhere where you can feel safe until I can get Sarah dealt with and better under control. And so we lived apart for about 5 months maybe. And then things calmed down with her. Got her on medication, got things stabilized. And he'd come over one Sunday and was about to leave way too soon. Well, I have things to do and whatnot. And I said to him, I think it's time you moved back. And he started to get kind of defensive. And when he'd do that, he'd get all blustery. And I just moved forward and put my hand like steadying on his arm and said, hey, I'm your friend. I love you. And he just melted. And what was nice about that is that he actually learned from that. The two of us together developed some ways to de-escalate an argument successfully for both of us. And his version of that same, move closer, don't move away, move closer. When I would sometimes get, about something. And he just move right up to me and fold his big, it's kind of a bearish personality. Build. Just fold me in his arms and said, "Hey, you are stuck with me. I'm not going anywhere."
And that really helped de-escalate arguments.
And it would just de-escalate an argument. Or me just, touching him, nesting, telling him I loved him. And then the other thing I also used is I could say to him, "Wait a minute. How did what I assumed was going to be a discussion, how did it turn into an argument? Can you help me here? Because I don't know how this happened." And that immediately pulled both of us out of the argument and looking more at what were we saying when things kind of went south. And then we could back it up to where we found where the point of misinterpretation, misunderstanding, whatever was. And then, there was a lot of hit and miss, but we had relatively few of those arguments that never really get resolved and that just leave this kind of build up of bitter taste in the mouth. We didn't have those. Had we solved everything in our marriage? No. We had one. That's the third one I'll tell you. So we had this one place. He'd say something like, "Let's go to Macy's and look for blah, blah, blah. And then afterwards on the way home, we can go have lunch at Cotixen." It's our favorite Mexican place. And I'd say, "Yeah, that's a great idea." So we'd be driving along, and then he'd say, "Oh, we could actually have lunch now and then go to Macy's." And I'd say, "Yeah, I could do that. But then if we went to Macy's first, we'd do such and such." I'm going, I could do either one. If he came back a third time, change of plans, I'd go, whatever you want. And I'd be annoyed. And what we finally got to is a pattern from my childhood. My mother would ask a question. She had an answer that was the right answer, the one she wanted to hear, so that I would be responsible for making decisions she wanted made. If I didn't give the right answer, she would continue to ask. And she would continue and continue. It became an interrogation. And for which I had no patience. You want something done, just tell me. But don't try and manipulate me into making your agenda my responsibility, sort of. And so my husband would go, "No, that's not what's going on. This is what's going on, I'm thinking out loud because I'm not sure which way would be better." And so a couple of months later, we're at the same place,
Of course.
And he'd say, "We've been married now 15 years. I think in 15 years you would realize this is all I mean." And I said, "Please, Nick, that knife cuts two directions. After 15 years, I think you'd realize that this really triggers a reaction."
Exactly.
So, and he goes, "You're right. I guess that does cut two ways." And then we just laughed. And then he'd say, he had a wonderful way of setting perspective. He'd say, "Well, we have a lifetime together to figure this one out." And, and it was not a biggie because there was no build-up of, I've been angry really about these other things that have never been dealt with. There wasn't any of that. So we weren't angry about other stuff. And so even that little friction was pretty meaningless.
What sounds amazing is that everything you described, all the conflicts that you've had, all the struggles, they've all been able to come back and really be worked out together, because you realize what repair attempts you really need within your relationship. And those repair attempts have really, really worked for you. And that really just describes the importance of how they can really make or break a relationship.
And it helps having two people that are really committed to making it work. Because initially, my husband came in with behavior patterns from his previous marriage. Things that had worked for him. And it became very apparent to me they weren't going to work. And they were eventually going to lead to some real trouble in the marriage. He was a very good communicator about all kinds of things that he wanted and felt. But if I communicated about something I felt about the relationship, he immediately heard it as criticism, and his way of coping with it was to bluster and accuse and attack. This wasn't so good. So this all came to a head one Saturday. He left early and said, I'm going to do some errands. This is 8:30. By 5 o'clock, when I haven't heard from him, and I'm thinking, okay, the police would have called me if he's, on the side of the road somewhere, so whatever. I'm going to go out to dinner, and I'm not going to sit home and worry. Just as I'm leaving, he calls. I've been up, and I did this, and I went and saw these people, and we've been having a drink and talking and whatnot. And I'm on my way home. And I said, I'm on my way to dinner. He said, I'll meet you. So we met at Sales for dinner and ordered. And I said to him, I was really worried, and when, since you stopped at Indian Owls, that would have been a great time to just give me a phone call and let me know where you are so I don't have to worry. Because I sat here most of today and worried. And he got really aggressive. You're not perfect and you do things. I'm going, Nick, I'm not angry with you, but you need to hear me. I said, you talk about feelings all the time and things you want. There needs to be room for me to do the same. More aggression. At this point, our meal came. And I realized I have a pretty calm, self-contained way of talking. And it is easy for somebody to think, whereas my husband was very emotionally expressive. And so I thought, yeah, he's not recognizing that this is about as expressive as I'm going to be, but he needs to listen. So the food came. I looked at the waitress and said, I'm taking mine to go. She took one look at my face, grabbed that meal, went back, gave it to me in a thing, and I said, thank you. And I put money on the table. I said, that's for my meal. Because we'd taken separate cars. Mm-hmm. And I said, I'll see you at the house. Just don't walk out on me. I said, at the moment, there's not room at this table for me.
That's a really powerful statement.
And we didn't really talk that through at the time. But he clearly did some thinking about it. Later on, he said, he didn't have much of a memory, not even a narrative memory. But I knew when he'd figured out. He said, I remember initially thinking, I'll just bluster my way past any argument and I'll always get my way. And it became really apparent that wasn't going to work with you. And I thought, yeah, that's because I walked out on you in that restaurant. Because in fact, it wasn't going to work. It wasn't going to build a happy marriage. But in fact, we then learned how to talk to each other. So, yeah, there were some initial rough places. But there was also a lot that was really good and positive.
Of course.
Yeah. So, yeah.
And as I know how much you would always talk about him and how you described him as this best friend of yours.
Absolutely.
He was just the big old bear in your life.
Yeah.
He was your best friend. And Dr. Wood, I'm really curious. For those out there that are really starting and building a brand new life with a significant other, what advice would you give to newlyweds in their stage of life? What advice about marriage would you give to them?
If you're going to make negative statements, make them I statements that attach to specific behavior. Don't make them judgments of the other person. So if somebody speaks in a certain way to you, you can say, when you get that tense and angry, or when I hear what sounds like anger, because your voice is loud, because your speech gets more rapid, I feel judged, I feel rejected, I feel uncared for, I feel whatever it is you feel. You can't sneak, I feel that you're being really an awful person. I mean, yeah. Which is just a way of saying you're an awful person. But also look at things from another person's point of view. I mean, I think Nick and I passed a very critical moment when my daughter was flipping out during adolescence. And what saved that moment and saved our marriage, in some senses, was my ability to think, what if it were the other way around? What if this was me? What if it was my issues being triggered by his child? What would I feel? Which then gave me empathy for him. So it's hard. I mean, you have to do some thinking and not just responding, because it's easy to respond, and the next thing you know, you've snipped and they've snipped and boom, 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 and things are just out of control. And so that's really important. Obviously, the more you have developed the habit during dating of talking honestly to each other, the easier it's going to be. But everybody has needs for closeness, needs for privacy, alone time, and the rhythm of those needs. And they don't necessarily coincide. And figuring out, how are we going to make this work for both of us? How am I going to get the alone time I need so I don't feel swallowed by your personality? One of the difficult things we had to maneuver is I have an incredible memory, and I am a logical thinker. And so in a logical argument with me, my husband was not unarmed, but not as heavily armed as I was. He didn't have the memory, and he didn't have the logical thinking skills, but he felt very immediately. And so we had to find a way to balance out those skills, for me not to overwhelm him with logic, for him not to overwhelm me with immediacy of feeling. So you have to make room for the other person. I think the Bible is right. Don't let the sun go down. when you're angry. See if you can't clear the boards. Now, the sad truth is, you cannot make a successful marriage by one person. And if you happen to marry somebody who really doesn't want to share a life together, doesn't really want to have to in any way grow or adapt together, that's going to be pretty hard. And you may have to separate in order to say, I want to be married to you, but we have to be in it together, and right now, there doesn't seem to be room for two of us here. Which was kind of what I said to my husband at the restaurant. There's not room for two of us at this table. And he really wanted that marriage to work, and I did too. And so that and the issue with my daughter, those were the two biggies that we faced, and we faced them early, like within the first year and a half. But we were happier 18 years later than on the happy day we were married. So it was a pretty big gift.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wood. This has been an amazing experience for me. I'm sure it's been an amazing experience for all of you. Thank you so much for listening in.
Thanks for asking me.